The Greeks said that the hanging gardens were built to please a homesick Persian concubine, an imitation of the mountains of her homeland on the flat plain of Iraq. It is filled with all sorts of trees and looks exactly like a mountain country. The several parts of it rise one on another and resemble a theatre. It is thickly planted, and the trees' broad leaves nearly touch each other and make delightful shade. Waters gush forth from high fountains, sink down into the ground, and are forced up again in twists and spirals, rushing and swirling through the pipes. Bountiful moisture bathes the tree roots, and the soil is perpetually moist. Such was the dream of paradise, the dream of Philo of Byzantium in the 3rd century before Christ. Follow these ancient streams back to their beginnings. Go, as Alexander did, back to the font of our experience, and you'll find not only paradise, but the most ancient gods as well. Just as they stand here in the gardens of the Villa d'Este at Tivoli, close by Rome, so they stand deep in our minds, back at our beginnings. All along Alexander's route through Asia were the temples of the most ancient gods. Gods whose Greek names Alexander knew and worshipped, but gods that when he saw them in other costumes and in other countries, he recognized as part of a common well of sacredness. This marvelous rock shrine is called Yassilikaya in central Turkey. It is the most sacred sanctuary of the ancient Hittites and other races too who came here after them. Most of their gods they brought with them from Central Asia. These reliefs are now some 3,000 years old and they've never been attacked. They still hold their ancient sacredness. We're right at the heart of the shrine. And that god there, that's the god Keshub. The god who in Greece becomes Zeus, who when he rolls his black curls causes thunder and thunderbolts to hit the ground. That one there, the small god with the double-headed axe, that becomes the Greek god Apollo. But it's the lady in the middle, that much-travelled lady, that's really our interest here. It's really a large part of the history of world religion too. 800 years after she's carved on this wall, she's found in India as the god Varuna. See, she's standing on a panther. She started standing on a panther 2,000 years before this scene was made in ancient Sumer. And 7,000 years before that, the villagers of Anatolia were painting her on the walls of their shrines. She is what is known as the great goddess, the mother goddess. In Alexander's day, the people of Asia called her Cybele. The Greeks called her Artemis, and her temple at Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Great is Diana of the Ephesians! The acoustics here are incredible, aren't they? Can you imagine what it must have been like with 40,000 people roaring those words down through the city streets and out across the sea? That's what the book of Acts said happened here in 53 AD when St. Paul brought Christianity to the great city of Ephesus. Diana is the Bible's name for Artemis. This was the city of Artemis. She decorated every temple, every building. She was the richness of the city and she was the pride of its inhabitants. And you can't be surprised that 40,000 of them were roaring their defiance at Christianity. She, of course, had been in the city for 1,000 years, and it would take St. Paul and his followers another 300 to dislodge her cult.
1800 years later, a single Englishman sat in this same theatre. He was looking out across the landscape, looking for any trace he could see of the great temple of Artemis. The Englishman's name was John Turtle Wood. He was a wealthy amateur traveller, an archaeologist, and in the way of those people in the 19th century, he was quietly obsessed. He was obsessed with finding one of the 7 wonders of the world, this great temple which had completely disappeared. Wood stayed in Ephesus for year after year, digging for that temple. He went through a fortune. He caught malaria. He was threatened with kidnapping. He was shot at. He broke God knows how many bones in his body, but he found the temple in the end. And it was here in the theatre that he found the first clue.
Wood's great clue was on this wall. Now, when he was digging here, all of this wall was covered with dirt, which had swept down from the mountains over the theatre. When Wood cleared it away, he found a whole lot of inscriptions on it. Now, that's not surprising, because there are lots of inscriptions. Ephesus is covered in them. But this one was rather interesting. It had been written about 50 years after St. Paul's visit to Ephesus by a citizen of the place called Caius Vibius Salutarius. And it stood here. It was such a remarkable inscription, in fact, that Wood got a British Navy boat, the HMS Terrible, to come in, dock close by. 15 Jolly Jack tars came along with ropes and hacksaws and removed the whole thing. In fact, they got a pound of tobacco for getting it away unbroken. Now, what this said was that this man, C. Vibius Salutarius, who lived about 50 years after St. Paul, had donated a whole lot of golden statues of Artemis to the great temple. Now, that was interesting in itself, but what was crucial for Wood was that it described a procession that these statues took every year on Artemis's birthday. It said the statues were brought from the temple to the gate of the city, the Magnesian Gate, and there they were met by the young men in the city and carried down in procession. So what Wood had to do now was to find this Magnesian Gate, and then he would have the road to the temple.
Using the inscriptions as his guide,